Chuck Wisner. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
I'm looking forward to it as well. Your book, The Art of Conscious Conversations. What is that?
Yes. it's the idea is that we learn how to be in conversation from our families, our cultures, and we adopt those patterns. So we are often in conversation without really understanding how they work, why they often don't work. Um, and so my attempt with the book was just sort of try to deconstruct conversation so we can understand there's different types and then how they work and how we can practice when we're, you know, trying to solve problems or whether we're in conflict or whether it's home or work. We
Mhm.
can navigate our relationships and our work much better if we have more awareness about how conversations work.
So, why do you think that conversations don't often work?
Well, I like to think of we humans, we have conversational patterns,
Mhm.
and they're like fingerprints. We have our own conversational fingerprint or a language pattern that has a lot to do with what we hear, has a lot to do with how we respond.
Mhm.
And if we are running our pattern that isn't serving us well, then we need to be aware of, wait a minute, I don't need to react this way, or can I adopt another way of thinking, or can I actually absorb someone else's perspective? So it's a way of saying, let's break any patterns that aren't serving us well that get us into conflict, whether it's in a relationship or at work,
Mhm.
so we can manage them and actually manifest a much more productive exchange and interaction with people.
One thing that I was actually fascinated about when I was actually taking a couple classes in college, one thing that I learned was confirmation bias and how we as humans like information that confirms what we already believe, and we're not
Right.
very receptive to new information.
Right.
What's your opinion on that, and how we could actually change that? Because I see it a lot in politics. Both sides always think that they're right,
Yes.
and that's just not true. It can't be true that both sides are right when they have differing opinions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, well, so confirmation bias is really it sort of goes back to the same thing. It's like that's a pattern that we have because it's a
Hmm.
comfortable pattern. We know it, we believe it, it's part of our belief system. It's part of the standards we hold of what's right and wrong and good and bad and ugly and pretty. Um, and so when you're in the pattern, it's just playing like on autopilot. So when we become more aware of our confirmation bias, and that takes some effort. It's just because we're giving it's almost like our egos don't like that to happen,
Hmm.
because that's solid ground that we think we have it all figured out. And then we go, wait a minute, maybe there's another way of thinking. But that point of saying, okay, maybe that's a bias. Can that change how I listen? Can that change how I think? Can that change how I react? So
Hmm.
it's this opportunity to say we do have confirmation bias, we do have belief systems, we do have standards that we most of our standards we didn't even adopt it consciously. We adopted them from our cultures, our family, our religion, our social world that we live in.
Right.
And so those standards become what we judge things by. And when we can step back and go, oh, go, what's my standard? And oh, I disagree with you. So maybe we have different standards. Let's talk about that instead of being in a battle.
And I see it a lot now that the election just happened.
Mhm.
And Thanksgiving's just around the corner, so these
Yeah, it's
Thanksgiving
true.
dinners are going to be very interesting. And you know, so I consider myself a Democrat, but I voted for Trump this time around. And from my own reflections, I've realized that I had a lot of confirmation bias when I just got into politics and started learning about politics. And I thought to myself, like, the other side is wrong. Why are they choosing to believe what they believe when what I see is to be right? But the more that I actually looked at both sides, I started changing my opinions.
Hmm.
So I guess my question is that abnormal, or is that something that people have to work towards to eliminate that confirmation bias and to get comfortable, or I mean uncomfortable, to get new information in? Because from people that I talk to, they're so stubborn with what they believe that they just don't want to change their belief system.
Right. Yeah. So, look, in my book, there's four types of conversations. The primary conversation is storytelling. So we live on stories. The universe survives on stories. Uh, Law is a story. Money is a story, right?
Right.
And but the trouble with stories is it also gets we get attached to our story, which is then our bias and our thinking we're right, right? But when we take them apart, stories are really three things. There's emotions,
Yeah.
there's facts, and then there's opinions. Now you can have a strong opinion and you might listen to somebody else and then you say, well, I'm going to switch this opinion for that opinion, right? But underneath there, I think we have a fundamental problem when we can't have a conversation that has some grounding in reality, some
Right.
grounding in what is true. Now, what's true is a big subject, but when something happens that we can see and hear with our own eyes or
Yeah.
experience with ourselves, we all agree on what truth is. It's a much bigger subject to say what truth is, but in the world of politics and our everyday life,
Yeah.
we all agree that this is a computer. We all agree that we're doing a podcast. We all agree that green is green, right? So
Right.
there's fundamental facts, and then it gets very slippery because facts and opinions, people don't often hear them differently,
Yeah.
right? They hear
Right.
an opinion. Someone speaks eloquently, or someone speaks powerfully,
Yeah.
and we say that sounds really great, and then we say that's true, but that's not true.
Yeah.
So whatever they're selling or whatever they're saying underneath, like if you and I were in a disagreement about something, the best thing to do is, can we find a few things that we agree on? Can we agree on a few facts that are undeniable, not make up, not, and we're on a slippery slope when the modern world, post medieval and then the Renaissance, and then the industrial revolution, scientific revolution, industrial revolution,
Yeah.
we have developed sciences and expertise that has self-correcting mechanisms. In other words, a scientist can do an experiment and say, "Oh, I just discovered how to do cold fusion and make energy free for everybody." But if other people can't replicate that, then that's not then that's not that it hasn't been self-corrected by others, right? And so, built into expertise, built into science, are these mechanisms for self-correction. Religion, on the other hand, is infallible. So anyway, there's a slippery slope there. But the, I believe that when we can't rely on experts and we can't believe science as we know it, and it might change next week, but that's
Hmm.
okay. But if we can't rely on as we know it, then we have a very hard time grounding our opinions in reality.
Yeah. And that's why I bring up politics, because I like religion. It's something that a lot of people avoid because it's very divisive. But it's interesting because we could look at politics, religion, possibly even science now. Even though those areas are very divisive, that's where we see a lot of more conflict. So we could actually study what goes on in those areas to understand communication and understand why people think differently, right?
Hmm.
And something that I had actually listened to, I don't know if the person who said this is someone that was working for the Trump administration. I want to say it was Kellyanne Conway. I don't know if that's her name or if
Hmm.
that's who said it.
Kellyanne. Yeah.
Yeah, but she said something about there being alternative facts,
Right.
which I found to be hilarious because what may be true to someone may not be true to someone else. If there's a fact presented to two people, they may see that fact differently. And that's what we see a lot in the media. So if
Well,
the,
let
yeah,
me just if you present a fact to two different people, they may well take that fact and form different opinions,
right, right.
right? Right. But the fact, you know, if we're really talking about undeniable facts, that doesn't change. You can take a fact and you can take a fact, whether it's in science or whatever, and
Yeah.
or politics, and you can take pieces of that and say, oh, that supports my position. Or someone else will be, yeah, but this part supports my position, right? That happens with climate change. 97% of the scientists and the experts and the researchers in the world agree on what's happening with climate change.
Yeah.
However, there's plenty out there on the web that takes another a small percent of some research that says, oh, it's all malarkey, it's not true, right? And so that is not grounding your opinion in facts. That's grounding your opinion to support your confirmation bias.
Yeah. So again, we see a lot of that in politics.
Absolutely.
The media, they present us with a set of facts. It could be Fox News and CNN. They get the same facts, but they represent the facts differently, or they present the facts differently to form an opinion, either opposing or supporting whatever it is that they're covering, even though it's the same story. But they'll just form different opinions. Say, this is what's going on, and this is bad that that's going on. And the other side may present the same facts and say, this is good, but they'll do it differently.
Well, they do it differently, but we have to be careful not to do a false equivalency,
Yeah.
because there's a difference about someone who takes a fact and forms an opinion based on the fact, and there's a then someone who takes the fact and say, no, that's not true. There's an alternative fact, and therefore my opinion is based on the alternative fact. That's a false equivalency, right? Where one opinion isn't equal to the other.
Right.
But the press falls into that trap all the time, right? And unfortunately, for listeners
Yeah.
who who are just absorbing information into their already confirmation bias or into their belief system,
Yeah.
you know, they're gonna one is going to be attracted while the other isn't, right? And so that's how we get into the mess we're in, where we're so divided and actually can't have conversations based in reality.
Yeah. And do we see a lot of that in personal relationships as well?
Oh yeah, yeah. Same dynamics, is just a smaller scale, right? Whether
Yeah.
you're at home fighting with your wife about whether you should do the dishes at night, or or you should go to bed and let the kitchen be a mess, or whether you're in a boardroom arguing, right?
Hmm.
It all comes down to that individual interaction, right?
Yeah.
And the level of awareness, the level of consciousness, the level of self reflection that we can have, the more likely we're going to be able to be in a fruitful, productive. Doesn't mean we're going to agree, but we can have a conversation based in reality. And I think we're on a very slippery slope in that domain.
Hmm. Yeah. What do you suggest that, say, a wife and a husband that have opposing opinions do to come to the middle and come to an understanding? Because there's always infighting in relationships, and both sides may disagree on something, and it just scales up, and now they're arguing and they're yelling at each other. But what do you suggest? Like, where is the moment that you should just step back and try to reel the other person in and say, well, we have a disagreement, but what can we actually do about it to actually solve the issue and not just argue about whether we're right or wrong?
Right, right. Because we're way up here arguing our opinions, and we don't
Yeah.
do any work underneath. So there's the opinions, and there's all this stuff underneath,
Hmm.
which is our beliefs and facts and reality underneath. So in my book, The Art of Conscious Conversations, I have
Yeah.
there's four archetypal elements to our
Uh-huh.
opinions. And so it's a real lovely little shortcut. People should put it on a sticky note
Yeah.
and put it on their refrigerator. So if you're in a disagreement with someone, there's four elements that are always, maybe not all four are playing out, but I'll guarantee you one or two or three of the four are playing out.
Hmm.
So let's just take an example of a husband and wife that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Um, I'll use an example. My wife and I used to fight over. Uh, we used to argue over. We have a dinner party.
Yeah.
We have a great time. It's late at night. We had a few drinks. Kitchen's a mess. Guests leave. I just want to go to bed.
Hmm.
My wife wants to stay in the kitchen and clean up. Right.
Hmm.
So that was tension. And we could say, gosh, just leave it alone already. Well, how can you do that? And we would get into an argument. Well, when we did our work, we realized, well, wait a minute. Okay, I'm going to walk you through the four desires. What is her desire? What's my desire? Right. When we talk about that, it's different than fighting about the damn dishes.
Hmm.
Right. It's like, oh, I'm so tired. I had a few drinks. My desire is to go put my head in a pillow and go to sleep.
Yeah.
My wife's desire is, I'm tired. I'm not that tired. My desire is I want to wake up in the morning and not have to do dishes. Nobody's right and nobody's wrong. They're just different desires,
Yeah.
right? We could fight about that, but if we accept that we can have different desires, then we can turn down the temperature a little bit. The
Hmm.
second item is, what are we concerned about? So number two is concerns. Concerns are about the future. I worry about something because I don't want tomorrow to look like today, or I don't want what happened today happen 2 weeks from now. Um, excuse me. Um,
Hmm.
and in this case, my wife's concern was just wanting to, like, it's sort of like her desire. It's not that separate in this situation. She just wanted to wake up and
Hmm.
not have to do dishes. All right.
Hmm.
And I didn't care about that. My concern was, no, tomorrow's tomorrow. I'm going to wake up. I'll do the work. It'll take me a half an hour and just be done with it. So that one's a little less relevant in this situation. The third one is
Hmm.
power and authority. Every relationship, every judgment, every criticism, every conversation that has an edge to it that we're arguing, there's power issues.
Right.
Whether it's man, woman, husband, wife, father, son, mother, daughter, mother, son, boss, employee, friend to friend, even in the friendship level, you give some friends more, the voice of some friends more power than another friend,
Right.
right? So authority is always there. For my wife and I in this situation, we have a pretty balanced relationship,
Mm-hmm.
equal. We share the chores, we share things. Uh, uh, so there's not a lot of power imbalance. So that's that for that. What for some people, for some couples, that might be a problem, where the man feels he has to dominate, he gets to make all the decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the power becomes a show. The fourth thing is standards. And that's where she and I were able to find some peace around that argument. It's like, wait a minute, her standards was she likes the kitchen to be spick and span. I don't care if it's a mess and for another day. And so what happens is, again, she's not right and I'm not right. They're standards. They're just
Mm-hmm.
standards that we learn to have through our families and our cultures. Nobody's right or wrong. But when we can say, oh, wow, you just have a different standard, I have a different standard. Instead of fighting about it, we can laugh about it. We can go, oh, wow, you have a different standard. Guess what? Who's going to win tonight? Okay, I'll do the dishes tomorrow. Let's go to bed. Or she'll say, no, no, you go to bed. I'll stay up and I'll do the dishes. Or we'll find a compromise. But that's because we, instead of fighting, we had a realization, we had an awareness that we had
Mm-hmm.
different standards, that we had different ways, different desires for how we would wake up in the morning, right?
Yeah.
And so that takes some of the tension out, and we can just then we can compromise. Then we can appreciate each other and say, "You're not wrong. We just have different ways of thinking about it." So those four things are crucial um, for almost any argument. There are also four things that if you want to know how to find out what someone's really thinking,
Mm-hmm.
ask them one of those questions. You know, if you're
Yeah.
making a judgment that you don't like that, what are you basing that judgment on? What are your standards for saying it was right or wrong? Or yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So it all comes down to standards, and we
Well,
as
that's one of the four.
yeah.
It's a big one, but that's one of the four. Yes.
And I guess what I was going to allude to is that we want everyone as individuals to meet our standards out in the world.
Yes. Yeah. I like to joke that, yeah, oh, yeah, when I'm upset about what someone's doing that I don't like, that's the world according to Chuck. That's the
Yeah.
world according to me, right? But
Right.
that's they don't live in the same world. That goes back to your confirmation bias. Your standard, my standard makes so much sense to us that we don't understand why other people don't see it the same way, right?
And just like driving on the freeway, if we have a standard of we need to go to 75 miles an hour on the freeway, but someone's going 70, and it irritates us because they're not driving to our standards because they have different standards of how they should be driving.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, I have a, I have I get agitated when people drive the speed limit in the left-hand lane,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
It's like, wait a minute, aren't the rules of the road like if you're driving slower, you're in the right, you're driving left, if you're driving faster, you're in the left lane to pass. For me, that's sort of like the normal way of that's a rule of driving, but not everybody adopts that rule of driving,
Hmm.
right? So I can catch myself and go, okay, world according to Chuck, and then I'll just pass them on the right, or I'll give them a quick flash to say move over. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But that's they play out in every little interaction we have.
Yeah, and there's people that have different standards out at driving, and I like to use that example because there's a lot of road rage, and it all goes back to people not meeting someone's standards of how they should be driving
Or acting,
or
yeah,
acting. Yeah,
or reacting, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, when I'm at a light and the light turns green, I like to wait at least a second because, especially here in Vegas, there's a lot of accidents and people driving recklessly. So I like to wait at least a second before I actually go when the light turns green. And some people drive with their hand on on their honk, and yeah, and they honk as soon as the light turns green. Sometimes they just honk. I'm like, I don't want to die today, so you'll have to wait.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, right, right. Yeah, and they'll, that's if as long as you can uh not let their honk throw you off balance,
Yeah,
you're fine with your standard, you know.
Hmm.
Now, if their honk threw you off balance and
Hmm.
you got angry, you know, you could roll down your window, you could stick your finger out the window, you know, and then now we're in different territory because now you let their different standard agitate you and get you to a different reaction
Hmm.
than you would have otherwise if you just, well, no, okay, he's just, you know, I'm going to do my thing, he's upset, this will all pass, you know.
Hmm.
So but if we hold on to those standards like a really tight fist,
Yeah.
someone's going to agitate it and then we're going to end up getting in trouble.
Yeah, and I think just like when you're texting someone, driving, it's the same thing because I feel that people feel protected being in their car. So they're more likely to react to stressful situations. Like if you're
Right.
texting someone and they anger you, you're more likely to confront them over whether you're actually speaking to them in person. You're less likely to react to stressful situations. Do you think that's true? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think in general, uh, whether it's email or text or
Hmm.
social media, there's lots of, because we're, you know, in the domain, you know, opinions are just flying everywhere, right? We're just
Yeah.
like in this swirl of opinions, that the written text or emails, there's a lot of room for misinterpretation,
Hmm.
because in person, or even in this way when we can see one another, we're picking up many cues. We're picking up the energy of the person. We're picking up whether they're relaxed, whether they're tense, whether they're angry, whether they're happy, you know. And we pick up those cues pretty unconsciously.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more likely that we can manage in person than, well, we can avoid some of the misinterpretations that happen and the miscommunications that happen through text. So I say, you know,
Yeah.
use email to say, hey, we should talk about something, and then talk about it and not
Yeah.
try to solve it through text or email.
Yeah, because it's very nerve wracking receiving a text saying we need to talk. I'm like, wow, is it good? Is it bad? Sometimes it's just like, there's this thing that we need to do. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I thought could have been something worse, but it's always nerve wracking receiving that text.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's better. So if I did want to talk to you about something
Hmm.
uh, uh, that was bothering me, right?
Yeah.
Um, the From a conversational point of view,
Hmm.
it's better for me to give a little context,
Yeah.
because, see, without the context, you get to make up your own story.
Yeah.
Oh, he wants to talk because he was mad because he didn't buy me a drink last night, or he didn't give me a ride home, or whatever. You
Hmm.
get to make up your own story. Whereas if I, through conversationally, and whether it's text or whatever, I say, hey, I'd really like to talk to you because I think we sort of misunderstood each other last night, and I just want to make
Hmm.
sure we can get back, reconnect around that subject, whatever it is. So if I give a little context, it doesn't allow you to make up your own story and then go
Hmm.
into worry land, or go into, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong, or what's he going to say, because you have no
Yeah.
information.
Yeah, because I also always worry when I'm sending an email at work, and then I send it, and I just feel like I sound like an asshole. Like I don't want them to interpret it that way,
Yeah.
because I mean, especially in work, I can't use emojis. That would just be weird.
Right. Right.
So it's very nuanced when you send someone an email and you're not in front of them, so for them to really read your facial expressions to understand the
Right.
context of the conversation. So that's what I
Yes.
worry about often.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it's the same, but email is the same thing. There's lots of room
Hmm.
for misinterpretation. So
Yeah.
I say, you know, keep emails crisp. You know,
Hmm.
like I actually developed a software where you can actually declare the intention of your email up front, like I need
Yeah.
information or I have a question or I need your help. Because again, that's setting a context so they know what's coming, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you just blast them with some data or you just blast them with, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Blah, 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 blah. Like they go, what does this guy want? What's the, is he just barking at me? Is he just giving me shit? So again, mindful, intentional, brief context setting is helps a lot when we're dealing with words on paper.
So, with you personally, was there a situation that made you want to actually get into the field of understanding communication? Something that just ticked you off and made you want to go into this area of expertise?
So wait a minute, reframe your question a little bit. I just want to make sure
So, was there a situation that you faced that actually made you want to go into this field of understanding communication? Because I know from what I understand, you've had different careers in the past,
yeah,
and this is what
yeah,
you're doing now.
right. Yeah, yeah. Well, so prior to studying language and mediation and the things that led me to do the work I do with leadership um, and writing the book, I was an architect. So I was an architect in Boston for 25 years. Uh, and it sounds like a very romantic profession, but it's
Yeah.
actually a very, very tough um, profession. Uh, People romanticize it, but it's a hard profession. Architecture school is a slog, and it's engineering and it's design. It's not all just drawing pretty pictures. You have to know how to put buildings together. You have to know materials. You have to know anyway. So there's a lot of conflict in that world. And I was in many, many situations where I saw owners, contractors, architects, engineers, business people, finance people, just in these incredibly bad conversations that were full of conflict. In
Yeah.
fact, I think in the first 3 pages of my book, I relay a story where one contractor came across the table and started a fist fight with the owner. Um,
Yeah.
and so over time, I have a natural sort of philosophical and psychological, spiritual sort of interest in life, and over time, I just thought this is ridiculous. These people aren't talking. But what turned the corner was I had a partner who was an alcoholic, and he was causing problems with our. Once we grew to a mid-sized firm, then he was a problem with our clients, and he was a problem with our employees. So we had to search for help
Yeah.
because we dumb architects didn't know what to do about people problems. So we hired some help and ended up with a lovely lady who came in to help us. And she met with us individually. She listened to us. She asked us questions. She understood everyone's biases, right? She helped us dissect the problem. What's true, what's not true, what do we want, what are our desires, what power issues are there, what standards do we have? Those four things. And I was like, when we got through the process of 2 or 3 or 4 months, I was like, wow, how did she do that? I mean, what she did really felt like magic to me because she had conversations with us that we couldn't have ourselves. And I was so taken by what she did was it just turned a switch and I wanted to know more. And I
Yeah.
just started studying, and I I learned from her. Her name was Linda Reed. I learned from her. I did mediation training through the Harvard Law School. I studied the ontology of language, um, which is what her background was, and so I re-educated myself. And after 4 years, I left architecture and
Oh,
started a whole new world.
wow.
That was the turn.
That was a turn, definitely. So, I have a similar story, I should say. Something that actually happened recently. I was pulling into a hotel, and there was a security truck driving by. So I had stopped at the stop sign, and this the security, he was just pulled on. He was stopped at the stop sign as well. The one next to me. So he wasn't going, so I just went, and I pulled up kind of by the valet. I pulled into a parking spot, and he pulls up behind me, and he gets off, and I rolled down my window, and he started yelling like, "There was a stop sign there. Why didn't you stop? You're going like 60 around here. You should not be going that fast." And I told him, "Can you lower your voice?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "No, I can't lower my voice." Like, and I told him, "You don't have to be yelling at me. I could understand what you're saying." He's like, "Well, blah 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 blah." I'm like, "Just lower your voice." And then he finally lowered his voice, and he's saying like, "You're going 60." And I told him like, I could guarantee you that I was not going 60 here. He's like, "Well, you're going 35." Like, no, I wasn't. It came to him actually lowering his voice, and something about him, because he was in this security uniform and he wanted to present the authority, but I was still able to calm him down and kind of calm the situation down. But what I see often is that people do not know how to have that communication aspect. And if someone comes up to you and starts yelling at you, they'll get confrontation on your back. But I've found that people have more control over the situations than they realize. And if it's something that a lot of people often exercise, we see less confrontations out in public. But a lot of people
Hmm.
do not understand that.
Yeah, yeah. So the analogy I like is when someone comes at you with a lot of heat or a lot of fire, right?
Yeah.
When we get triggered and we get angry because they're now hollering at us, they're throwing, hot darts at us or fiery bullets at us, um, and we get triggered, then what we're doing is we're putting fuel on the fire, right? And then anything could happen. What you were able to do is stay calm and ask him to let's lower our voices, or let's figure this out.
Yeah.
But your calmness was not throwing fuel in the fire. Your calmness was throwing a little blanket on it, going, okay, there's a problem here, but let's talk. There's a problem here, but let's stay calm and be reasonable. If you stay with that, some people will react in a positive way, like your experience. And that's really great. And that's what we can all learn to do. Don't throw fuel in the fire, but calm it down.
Yeah.
But there are times, however, when that happens and you try what you tried and it doesn't work. And then you have to really take it. Then you have to say, you know what? This isn't worth my energy.
Yeah.
I'm going to walk away, because if I don't walk away, they might get worse. Even though I'm not fueling the fire, they might do something worse, and then it might trigger me. It's not worth my energy. It's not worth my time. I'm just going to walk away. And
Yeah.
that's a perfectly acceptable as a perfectly acceptable option to have to consider.
Yeah. Although that is easier with strangers than your spouse. Because if you walk away from your spouse, then I mean you're still living together.
Yeah, that's right, right. Yeah, no, that's a different. Yeah, there's strangers, and then there's your friends and your spouse or your partners or whatever.
Yeah.
And but even there, you walk away, but you're not walking away like, I'm walking away. I don't ever want to see you again. I don't need to give you my energy. You're walking away to say, I need to calm down, or let's take a break. Let's take a breath. Let's take a walk to calm things down, right? Because usually are in an argument where we haven't taken the time to go, why are we arguing?
Hmm.
What's the underbelly of this argument? Standards,
Yeah.
desires, concerns, power issues? What's
Hmm.
underbelly? And if we sometimes we can say with a loved one, you know what, I'm getting triggered. I'm just going to take a breath, or I'm going to go outside for 10 minutes to cool my jets, right?
Yeah.
Because then we're preparing ourselves to have a different kind of conversation, a different kind of more aware, conscious conversation.
And it goes back to standards because it's a standard that should be really set on early in the relationship. Because if it's not dealt with early in the relationship and you let the other person know, well, this is how we should deal with issues, and if that is just prolonged, and then you walk away, it may seem like you're just being dismissive.
Right.
But I guess that's the thing that I have a lot of trouble with, setting the standard. Of I enjoy just leaving a heated argument and cooling down.
Hmm.
But a lot of people do not have that standard and
Right.
don't really acknowledge that standard. But what do you say about setting a standard when it's a little later in the relationship that maybe we should just calm down and we should not continue this argument because I think it goes also to someone's childhood, and that's how they were raised, and that's how they were. That's how they learned to communicate. How do you, or what do you say about what do you have to say about learning how to communicate later on in adulthood?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Well, you're right about the family thing. I grew up with four
Hmm.
siblings, noisy household,
Hmm.
arguing parents, a lot of noise, parents arguing in front of us arguing.
Yeah.
We weren't Italian, but we were very vocal. Italians can be really, really vocal, and it's exciting.
Yeah.
My wife grew up in a family that was really quiet.
Hmm.
Her parents never argued in front of the kids. It was just there was no conflict. So we have a very different standard around what's conflict and what's not conflict. For me, some conversation that's has a little energy and a little juice around it isn't really
Hmm.
conflict. It's about people going, well, let's spar about this. Let's get on it. Let's figure this out, or let's talk about it.
Yeah.
For her, that's like avoidance. So I think with any relationship, even after a while, and I just had a client that I was working with recently on this. They had a new child,
Hmm.
and new kids really are an upheaval in parents' lives.
Yeah.
You don't know what's coming until it comes. But they were having arguments about things and the baby, right? See,
Hmm.
but until they realized that they were one person had a higher standard of care than the other
Hmm.
person, they were able to talk about that
Hmm.
than argue about why did this happen. You
Yeah.
screwed up, you did this, you did that. But if they were like, wow, wait a minute, maybe let's instead of arguing up here, let's go underneath and say what are our standards.
Hmm.
They might not want to change their standards, but knowing they have different standards gives them an opportunity to then compromise or find a way to balance one another out. So I
Yeah.
don't think it's ever too late.
Hmm.
So, because any judgment we have, any argument we're in, those elements are there. And
Hmm.
it's much easier to talk about those elements than it is to continue arguing. And you can all sit like standards are not magic. They're just, we adopted them
Hmm.
not on purpose. They just happen to us. So we can change them anytime, but it takes effort,
No, it
you
definitely
know,
does.
it takes effort.
Yeah, especially if you grew up a certain way with certain standards and then come to realize that maybe those standards were not correct and maybe I should be the one that makes the difference and setting different standards.
Right. Can I change mine? Right. Right. Am I willing to change mine? And that sort of gets around to that. There's a whole part of the book around collaborative conversation, which
Hmm.
is how we tell our story and how we listen. Because if we can really be in a conversation about standards and some person has a different standard of judging Even in business, they say, well, this really isn't working. Well, what's their standard? They have a higher standard of excellence, say, than I do.
Mm-hmm.
I can go, oh wow, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
And but you know what? That takes vulnerability and that takes humility to
Mm-hmm.
be able to go, oh, he has a higher standard. And you know what? For the project we're working on, that's a better standard.
Mm-hmm.
I can adopt that. But you have to be a little vulnerable to say I'm wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and humility to say I can, yeah, I can change. I can do it. I can think differently. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a conscious choice at that point. Right. So
Yeah.
you can switch, but it's that willingness to hear the other person's standard, to listen and really understand
Mm-hmm.
where that comes from.
Yeah. And willingness to be vulnerable, which a lot of people don't have.
Right. There's a big misunderstanding where a lot of people think that vulnerability is weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, vulnerability can be actually quite powerful.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we're approaching an hour, and this has been a really interesting conversation. And I'm sure this conversation could go on for hours because
That's
communication,
right.
it's something that's very abstract, and a lot of people need to understand because I feel that we're living in a world that's becoming more divisive with politics, religion, just so many
Mhm.
different things, and we're lacking an understanding in what good communication is, and a lot of us need to know how to communicate better for a better world.
Yeah, that's right. And you're right. We could go on for a long time, because there's four basic conversations in the book and these four basic archetypal elements that we talked about.
Hmm.
But, the book is really to give us a new way of thinking about
Hmm.
conversations and then a new way to practice being in them. So
Yeah.
I would encourage your listeners to just, take it slow, but maybe, educate yourself a little bit so you actually can think about and be in conversations in a new way.
Yeah. Well, Chuck Wisner, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. People can find me on Instagram, Chuck_Wisner. They can find me on LinkedIn. My website, chuckwisner.com, has a free download of the introduction.
Hmm.
Um, so they can find me that way.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on.